I've been reading a book called Time for Change. It's by Yanis Varoufakis. Actually, I haven't been reading it, I've been listening to it. And I haven't been listening to it in English, I've been listening to it in German. I am learning German with comprehensible input, just like right now you are learning English with comprehensible input with this video. So, the book Time for Change gives a simplified explanation of economics. And one part in particular that I want to talk about in this video is market economies versus economies with markets. These are two terms that Varoufakis uses in this book. I don't know enough about economics to know how widespread, how common these terms are, if they're commonly used by other economists, but they seemed to me to be very clear terms that you can easily understand, so I thought I'd make a video about them. They both have to do with the transition from feudalism to capitalism. Before capitalism, there was feudalism. First, what is a market? The way he puts it in the book, at its most basic, a market is exchange. There's at least two people, maybe more, but at least two people who each have something that the other person wants. So they trade, they swap, they exchange those two things. The one person gives what he has to the other in exchange for the thing that he wants, in exchange for getting the thing that he wants from the other person. They swap. And a proper market is just that, but a lot more complicated. There's a lot of different people and a lot of different things, and maybe what you want, you can't directly trade, swap with the person who has it, but maybe through intermediaries. You can swap what you have for something else that you don't want, but that something else is what the person wants who has what you want. So you get something because you know it's what someone else wants who has what you want. I hope that that's understandable. It's not direct. It's much more complicated, a proper market. In feudalism, before capitalism, there were economies with markets. Markets weren't central. They weren't very important. You had lords who owned the land. The land belonged to the lords, and you had peasants or serfs working on that land. People, the ordinary people, most of the people, living on land that they worked. They grew vegetables, they grew food, they grew grain, they kept animals for meat or milk or cheese or anything else. They worked on the land and produced what they needed to survive. They produced what they needed to eat, to make clothes, to build their houses. They chopped wood. And the Lord would take some of this. The Lord had lots of people working on his land, living on his land, and he would get part of what they made, part of what they produced for him, to feed him and to feed his court, the other people that lived a higher life with him, and to produce their clothes. And then what was left over after this was the surplus. The surplus is what's left over after you've taken everything you need to survive. If you have food, grain, you make bread with it, you make other things that you eat, and if there's grain left over that you don't need to eat, you have enough, that's surplus. So when the Lord had taken his amount to feed himself and his group of people, what was left over what they didn't need to survive, they could sell in markets. They could sell in markets. They could trade it with other people to get things that they couldn't make, that they couldn't produce themselves. They could trade the surplus of what they produced for other things in a market. But the point is, it always happened after the consumption. You consumed, you ate, you used what you needed, and then if there was some left over, you traded that in a market. A market was a secondary thing in life. The primary mode of production, the primary life people lived, didn't involve markets. They produced what they needed to survive, what they needed to live, and whatever was remaining, that went into markets. That was the term economy with markets. The main thing is the economy, and there's a bit of markets with it. The other term was a market economy. The type of economy is a market economy. The markets are central to the economy. The economy wouldn't work without markets. You need markets for the economy to work. That is the capitalist economy, a market economy. What does that mean? It means you don't produce, you don't work primarily to make things that you need to survive. Your primary job is to make things to sell on the market. And then on the market, you can buy, you can trade, you can buy what you need to survive. You can trade what you produce for all the things that you need to survive. So it's the other way around. What you produce, the market, is your primary focus. You work to have things that you can sell on the market, that you can trade in the market, in exchange to get back in return all the things you need to survive. And the market becomes so important because you have to constantly think about, is what you're making, is what you're producing going to sell for a high price in the market? In feudalism, it didn't matter. What mattered was that you produced enough to eat. If there was no excess, if there was nothing left over, it wasn't so important, because as long as you had produced enough, made enough to eat, to feed yourself, your family, and your Lord, you weren't going to die. You weren't going to starve because you didn't have enough food. Producing for your own survival was the primary task. Under capitalism, in a market economy, your primary task is to produce something that other people want to buy. You have to produce something that is going to make you money, that other people want to buy, so that you make the money that you need to then buy all the different things you need to survive. And don't forget that you can support me on Patreon. The link is in the description below.